Okay, let's talk some more EUL. So I want to talk about how things went over the course of the stage. We'll talk about the expectations before the stage started, and then we'll see how things progressed, looking at the matches, and then we'll see where everything ends up compared to where it was expected to end up. So, okay, here is my power ranking that I did before the stage started. So this is just my own list, but I think it pretty well matches community sentiment. Maybe a few things could be reordered, but yeah, I think this is pretty accurate, and it does end up being pretty accurate. I did have, I think, the strictly the top half correct and bottom half correct, not in the right order, but the top half and bottom half. Anyways, so we'll start at the bottom. Keep in mind that the tiers don't really matter here, just the ordering, so it's like BDS, G2, Heroic, Eminem, so on and so forth. Okay, so we'll start at the bottom. Navi, they lost Doki and saves, and maybe they wanted to drop saves, but probably they didn't want to drop Doki. Doki went over to G2, so they had to pick up two players, seemingly more out of necessity than anything. They got Thunder and Kayak, which were two more support-oriented players, so they look like a team really lacking firepower. Maybe this was maybe I underrated them a little bit by putting them in last, but it looked like they would really struggle by not having a ton of firepower in a meta that is a lot about firepower. Okay, Empire played this stage as Pwns, and it's not the Empire of old anymore. They dropped all of their players except for Scyther and picked up 4 new Russian players, and so maybe they were deserving of last place. I was just giving them a little bit of a benefit of the doubt. Maybe this was a little bit more thought out than it seemed, but it really wasn't. So a couple promising seeming players and a couple of players kind of looking for redemption. And so, you know, if they got anywhere up here, it definitely would have been a surprise. But okay, so maybe even putting them at 9th was a little bit optimistic. Rogue, sort of similar to Navi, they lost 2 of their players, one of them going over to G2, that being Prano, and the other one just being dropped and not going anywhere. Aces was rumored to be going to G2 for a while, and it's unclear if that actually was supposed to happen. It just didn't, or whatever. But he was like the second best rated player in stage 3, so it's a little bit weird that he got dropped and didn't go anywhere. Maybe he'll be going somewhere in stage 2 or 3. One team in particular is seemingly looking for a player. So right, it seemed like it was kind of damning what happened. They pick up Kanto and Deepak, and Kanto was obviously great back in his day, definitely fell off by the time he left G2, and then Deepak had been lingering around T2 for the longest time, and finally now got his call up. So they seem like safe-ish options, just maybe not good enough replacements for the players they were replacing, but okay, so if Kanto could be anywhere near as good as he was in the past, and if Deepak ended up being good, maybe it would work out for the team. But I thought it was safer to put him down here. I thought that maybe they could be fighting for up here, which is sort of actually what ends up happening, but I thought they could also end up down here, so I sort of split the difference. And then Secret, this might be the most optimistic placement on the list, or at least one of them. They were in 9th place last season, so they were fighting for their spot. They had to beat Hellraisers, and wasn't it the reverse 3-0, if I remember right? So they barely maintained their spot, but I sort of liked their play at the SI qualifier. And they seemed like they were sort of on the come up. You know, a lot of the struggles they had in 2021 was before their roster was completed or changed or whatever, before Kendra was on the roster, and maybe one other player, but their struggles actually sort of continue into the stage, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I was just sort of optimistic regarding them, and I thought maybe they'd had enough time to figure things out, and seemingly maybe they'll need a little bit more time. Okay, Virtus Pro, they played the stage as outsiders, and maybe I didn't mention, no, I think I did right. These guys were Pwns or Pawns or whatever, and then these guys were outsiders. So I think these guys were sort of slept on at the time. They were always fighting to make it into that top echelon of teams. They didn't go to any majors last year, but before that, they did qualify for, not this most recent SI, but the one before that. They didn't actually end up being able to go, and they made it to at least one of the EUL mini majors. So it's not that they were terrible. They were always sort of fighting for the top, just very often they didn't actually make it into the top. But now with these roster changes, maybe they had the potential to, but I put them here a little bit conservatively because, well, I mean, it seemed like all of these teams were going to be really good, and they do end up being really good, at least compared to the other team. So yeah, I think Virtus Pro still has potential in the future, just like they had potential back then. Vitality and, well, their LFO, I just didn't change the logo or whatever. I think at the time I made the tier list, Vitality had already dropped them, but I don't think they actually had another logo that I could use, so I rocked with that. Right, so they could have been placed higher, and I just thought they were seemingly outdone a little bit by these teams. And yeah, I don't think you could really put Vitality any lower, maybe one spot lower, but definitely couldn't put them down here. LFO, I don't know, is it like disrespectful or something to say Vitality? They're not with Vitality, okay, right? But no, certainly they could place up here, and I think in this tier is the lowest that they would realistically place. And they picked up Mowgli, so it seemed like one of the better changes. So they had a lot of potential, but they did sort of need to prove it. For for the longest time, that org and that team and whatever had been fluctuating, and at a lot of different times it seemed like they should be breaking into the top, and sometimes they were breaking into the top, but not the very top, just sort of like that top 4 kind of thing. So yeah, a lot of potential. Eminem, I mean, if you want to talk about potential, it was unclear how well they would translate to T1 immediately, because it all came pretty quickly in that they qualified for EUL and they qualified for SI, and then they played SI, and now here they are playing in EUL. And right, so 3 incredible fraggers and a strong backline. It looked like they would be a really good team, and maybe going to SI would be getting enough experience under their belt to make them immediately a force in EUL. But right, the matter wasn't how good the players are, but just a matter of how quickly they would adapt. Nello had previously played in T1, but nobody else on the team. So yeah, I think everybody expected them to do well. It's just a matter of if they would do well immediately or not. Okay, Heroic. So not the Heroic from before. This is Kavana. They were Kavana last year. They dropped Anarchic, they're still on as like a strategic coach or something, and they picked up Uno. So it seemed like a pretty good change to make, and perhaps just the change they needed. I think they were a really good team last year. They were just missing a little something, and then maybe perhaps it was just one more solid player on the roster that they needed. And well, I mean, yeah, spoiler, it does end up working out quite well for them. And right, they did fall off, I think, a little bit. They were top 4 or something in stage 1, and then they sort of fell off in stages 2 and 3, but I think the potential was always there. And so maybe they'd break into the top 2, but these 2 teams just seemed a little bit more promising at the time. G2, yeah, I mean, maybe we should learn our lesson about the super team thing by now, but this one looked a little bit different in that it wasn't just straight gunners. It seemed like everyone was going to fulfill their role adequately. I mean, we had the 2 entry players in Citizen and Doki, maybe neither of them being as aggressive as you might necessarily want for a first entry, but I think Doki fills the role well enough. And then Alamau, incredible flex, and then the sort of backline of Virtue. Virtue wasn't always good. He's had his moments. And then Prano is probably seemingly the most important player coming on this roster, actually them picking up a support player in IGL and whatever. So we'll see how they progress from here. But at the time, it looked extremely promising, and I think it would have been just wrong to put them down here, but I think maybe you could have bumped them down a little bit. Like maybe like Vitality, Heroic could have been above them, this sort of thing. BDS, obviously an incredible team. They were the kings of EUL last year, and their only real competition was Empire. Internationally, I think Empire outshined them, but within the region, BDS ended up in first place. And so now it was largely just a question if the bad mojo from SI would continue into EUL. And okay, so I guess it does it for this portion. Let's go over to Liquipedia to take a look at the matches, and then again, we'll summarize everything at the end. Okay, so let's just run down the line. I'm going to try to be pretty brief. There are 45 matches to talk about, so we'll just go down the line. LFO and Outsiders played each other, and this was a close match, obviously. LFO, I had them, 1 spot above Outsiders, so it makes sense that they would get a close win, so a good start to the season by them. Pones and Secret, 2 of the worst-looking teams, and, well, I placed them relatively close on the power ranking, and here they are with a close match. G2 and Rogue, I think this was a little bit of a surprise. I think a lot of people thought G2 would just destroy Rogue, but it was another close match, so very exciting first day. But pretty much everyone getting off to the start that you expect. Maybe Pones over Secret was a little bit of an upset, I don't know. Navi versus BDS, yeah, this was very surprising that Navi took BDS to overtime, but really it was BDS taking Navi to overtime. Didn't Navi take a massive lead, and then they got mega come back on by BDS, so a little bit dangerous looking for BDS, and so maybe it was Navi actually was a better team than expected, or maybe BDS would have struggles that some people expected. We'll have to see as things progress. And then Heroic over Eminem, close-ish match, and probably the expected result, but you could have also seen it going the other way. And then in day 2, Heroic destroys Pones, so Heroic starts being dominant. I mean, they did get a win in the first day, but you'll see that they don't really lose too many matches, and they start getting a lot of wins here. And, well, we'll get to this in a second. Outsiders versus Navi. This is about expected, too. Navi looked like sort of a bottom-half team, then Outsiders maybe look around the middle, and so here they are with a fairly decisive win. G2 over Eminem. I mean, based on the power ranking, this was also expected. Eminem playing 2 strong teams to start out with and having 2 fairly close results. Not terrible. They're definitely going to have to start bouncing back if they want to make the major. LFO over Secret, this makes a lot of sense, 7-3 scoreline. Rogue over BDS, definitely a shock. Maybe not the biggest shock given what we saw in Play Day 1, but going into the stage, yeah, Rogue didn't look like they should be that good, and BDS looked like they should probably continue to be good, so definitely an upset there, even if it was another overtime game. So 2 overtimes for BDS thus far. Rogue versus Pones, so surprisingly close based on what happened in the first 2 days, but still another win for Rogue is quite solid. Navi beating Heroic, this is surprising, and especially so in context of the season at large. This is the only loss that Heroic took, and it's to Navi, who end up in, what, like 8th place or something, so that was quite weird. They played on Bank, I don't know what happened, just Heroic was having a bad day, Navi was having a good day, whatever. A little bit weird. BDS over LFO 7-4, not terribly shocking. Could have gone the other way maybe. Outsiders over G2, a little bit surprising, but also not overly so. Secret over Eminem, this was a little bit shocking. Does it say on here? I'm unsure if this is when Titan started subbing in, or if it was the next game. I think it was this one, not 100% sure. But if it was this one, then it's super weird. Why is Eminem losing to this team with the coach? It's their closest game thus far, but I mean, Secret seems like a much lower caliber team than G2 and Heroic, so a little bit of a shocker there. Maybe things are looking good for Secret. Maybe Eminem aren't going to be the force to be reckoned with that people expected them to be going into the 4th day. Secret over Outsiders, another shock. Why is Secret winning again with their coach? I think, yeah, this is the first one. This is the second one. So 2 in a row with the coach. Maybe the coach is magic. I don't know. But seemed like Outsiders should have won that one. Navi over Pones, not terribly shocking. Heroic over G2. About what you'd expect, I think, at this point. This one also could have gone either way, and both based on expectations and how close it was in the server, 7-5. Eminem over BDS, that's a little bit surprising. Maybe Eminem could win, but BDS being their first win of the stage is a little bit weird, and especially it being a 7-3. Rogue versus LFO. At this point, I think these two teams seemed similar in power level after the first 3 playdays, and it was a 15-round, slobber knocker? Is that the one they like to say? Okay, so Pones over Eminem, very shocking result. Pones not looking very good up to this point, and Eminem also not looking that good up to this point, but they do have the BDS win, so a 7-2 loss to Pones was super weird. Eminem just was a bit of an anomaly this stage. LFO over G2, not too shocking, close game there. Rogue over Navi, at this point also not too shocking, pretty big beatdown, but maybe it could have gone the other way. Navi did take down Heroic in a 7-2 fashion back here. Outsiders destroyed by BDS, and then Heroic taking down Secret. So Heroic continue on the up and up, right? So they get their first loss here, their only loss here, and now they're on a little bit of a 2-win streak, which will continue going into the 6th playday. Outsiders taking down Pwn, so these are the 2 Russian teams going head to head, and Outsiders looked like the better team before, and now obviously after the match, 7-3 result. Rogue over Secret to make sense. Heroic over BDS. Yeah, this is sort of where the tables are turning a little bit here. So BDS maybe took a little bit of a questionable loss to Eminem, and Heroic took a little bit of a questionable loss to Navi, and BDS maybe even having some more struggles beyond that. But if BDS had won this, it'd be a little bit less clear, but I think at this point Heroic had emerged as the best team in the league at the time, and they would continue to be the best team up through the end of the stage. Eminem versus LFO, very close game, and Eminem, maybe this is really where they're waking up, because LFO had looked quite good and Eminem had looked not so good. They do end up taking him down. G2 over Navi, a little bit closer than you'd want, but Doki taking down his former team there. Playday number 7, LFO taking down Navi, makes sense. BDS over Secret, yeah, Secret taking quite, a pretty good team, but BDS is having their struggles, so they took him 12 rounds, but BDS still getting the full 3 points. G2 destroys Pones. Heroic takes down Outsiders, close game. These make sense. And Eminem over Rogue, maybe a little bit surprising. I think at this point you probably expected Rogue to be beating Eminem, but Eminem really heated up at the end of the stage. They got, 4 in a row, starting with this round 15 game, and then they didn't get another loss. So yeah, if they'd heated up just a little bit earlier, they could have made the major, but not what ends up happening. Playday number 8, the penultimate playday. Outsiders 7-2 over Rogue, a little bit surprising. BDS 7-5 over Pones, also surprising that they got so many rounds on them. Probably shouldn't have been so close. Pones, I think, ended up being not as bad as people thought, just because they got so many rounds on so many good teams. Maybe they do have potential going forward. We'll have to see. Heroic over LFO, 7-4. G2 7-5 over Secret, so here's another case of Secret almost going to overtime against a pretty good team. And then Eminem over Navi. Okay, and then going into the final playday, there were Heroic was already locked into the major, and there were 6 teams fighting for 3 spots, so I think it was only Secret, Navi, and Pones that couldn't go to the major. Everyone else could go to the major, or again, in the case of Heroic, would definitely be going to the major. So LFO takes down Pones. This gives LFO a pretty good shot to go to the major. Eminem eliminated Eminem from the major, and then Eminem beats Outsiders, so this eliminated Outsiders' chance of going to the major, and then BDS beat G2, locking BDS into the major, also locking LFO into the major, and leaving the last spot up to either G2 or Rogue. Rogue having to beat Heroic in regulation, not what ends up happening. So this game locks G2 into the major. And right, Navi taking down Secret. So in terms of surprises, I mean, Pones taking another 5 rounds on a pretty solid team. This one may be a little bit of a surprise. Outsiders coming into the day with 12 points, Eminem with 11 points, but Eminem had been pretty hot. This was surprising, maybe not that BDS beat G2, but that it was a 7-1 blowout. And then this one, you know, maybe Heroic wasn't going to play that hard. They were already locked into the major and first place. All they were doing was fighting to deny Rogue, but there are still reasons to get points at this point. And then Navi over Secret, probably the expected result, and then even pretty close. They were on, both 7 points apiece, so makes sense there. And so let's go up to the standings, and we'll talk about this. All right, so starting at the bottom here, Pones, yeah, they do end up in 10th place, and that's pretty well where they were expected to go, you know, 9th or 10th or 8th or something like that. At the bottom of the board, again, them ending up here would have been a little bit surprising. Team Secret, so they underperformed based on where I had them on the power ranking, but who could have expected the whole Pack Bowl thing to happen again, right? So I think they showed potential. Yeah, they did only get 8 points on the board, but they were close to getting a few more points, you know, just like one more round against some number of teams would have got them a few more points. So, right, if they can find a solid 5th to take over for Titan, who had, just like god-awful stats. And what do you expect? He was just their coach and stepping in and just being guy who plants the diffuser, even though I think he got a lot of kills now in that very last game, right? Okay, so yeah, I think they have potential going forward, but yeah, they're going to need to step it up if they want to avoid being in one of the relegation positions once again. Navi, maybe a little bit better than expected. I did have them at the very bottom, but still, they're pretty close to the bottom, only 9 points on the board. But yeah, definitely showing more life than some people might have thought. Outsiders maybe underperforming a little bit. I had them at 6th place, and they're at 7th place by only a margin of 1 point, so not too surprising. Maybe they have the mobility to move up. They did go perfectly even in terms of round count, despite losing one more game than they actually won. They never went to overtime, so I think still a team with potential. Maybe once they get the support from their org back, I don't know the logistics of that in its entirety. Maybe it was hampering them in a significant way. Maybe it wasn't, and maybe they just need more time as a not a completely new roster, but they did make some pickups, so maybe give them a little bit more time, even though, like most of these rosters did make a change. Rogue, the top of the bottom half here, I had them at 8th place, so 6th place is pretty good, and they were fighting for even up to 3rd place in that last day, so they had a lot of mobility there, and just one different result, and yeah, they could have made the major, they could have been 3rd or 4th place or whatever, and so I'd say they definitely didn't get what they wanted. I'm sure they wanted to go to the major, and they expected that they could go to the major, but I don't think many people were expecting that they would go to the major. So good stage relative to community expectations, and they showed a lot of potential. And Cryans had his moments, but I'm glad to see him do quite well on the stage after his whole thing on G2, and then he went back to Challenger League and slaughtered everybody, and now he's back and had a good stage. Let's see if he can keep it up, and then see how Deepak and Kanto further progress on the team. Okay. Eminem may be a little bit disappointing. If they hadn't had such a slow start, they definitely could have made the major. Just one more win, and yeah, 17 points definitely puts them into one of the major spots. And then maybe even they take points off one of these teams. If I don't remember who they lost to in particular, but right, so they could have jumped up a spot or 2, or maybe even 3, depending on what happened. So yeah, I think good. It looks good for them going forward if they can just get off to a little bit hotter of a start going into the next stage. So they did have the SI experience, but going to SI meant that they also had maybe a little bit less time to prepare for the meta changes. They were burnt out and this and that. Okay, so I'd expect them to have a pretty good, if not better, stage going into stage number 2, even though not a bad stage, right? 5th place gets you a decent number of SI points, and then we have the top 4 G2. So a little bit disappointing at the end. They were quote-unquote gifted the major spot. Of course, they did earn it over the course of the stage. Somebody was commenting about how they weren't really gifted it, and yeah, I mean, they weren't actually gifted it, but it did just come down to the result of another game that was not in their control, so in a sense, yeah, they were gifted it, right? If Rogue had beaten Heroic, then G2 would not be going to the major, so G2, I don't think they quite lived up to the hype, but I still think they have the potential. They did end up top 4, they tied LFO on points, and yeah, they definitely have a lot of potential if they can just activate a little bit more of that star power and mesh a little bit more as a team. They could definitely do great things. Let's see how they play at the major. LFO, X Vitality, whatever. Yeah, I think they did quite well, and my unoptimistic placement of them I mean, looks unoptimistic now, right? I had them at 5th place, and here they are at 3rd place, only beating G2 on in terms of the tiebreaker, but still 3rd place nonetheless. Going to the major, let's see if they can outdo their performance from the last major where they didn't really do too much. But, you know, Mowgli now joining the squad, let's see. And BDS, you know, they got off to a little bit of a rocky start, having some close games, some weird losses, whatever. They still end up in 2nd place here. Not even close to 1st place, a whole 6 points behind them. But, I mean, I guess if BDS had beat Heroic, then that means Heroic loses 3 points, BDS gets 3 points, and then they're both on 21. But, you know, okay, 6-point difference. Yeah, BDS, maybe they can finally win a major. We'll have to see. This looks like one of their weaker major entrances. Other times, people were like, oh yeah, they're the favorite to win the major. But now it's a little bit less certain, but I still think they're definitely a contender to go deep in the major, maybe even win the major. And then finally, we have Heroic, who, yeah, they're finally thriving. You know, they didn't get a shot to go to a major last year. They were top 4 in that first stage, but there was no major corresponding to that stage. SI replaced it. And then they weren't quite top 4 in either of the other 2 stages, and then they missed out on SI just barely. So now the changes really benefited them, the roster moves, and then perhaps even the format changes with the maps and the repick or whatever. But I imagine the biggest benefit that they gained is the fact that a lot of the other teams were sort of in disarray. Empire got blown up and is not the same team anymore. BDS was potentially going to be carrying over some of that bad mojo from SI. LFO, I mean, were maybe sort of an improved team, but they also had a roster move. G2, sort of a different team, and it's not like G2 was exactly a force to be reckoned with back in Stage 3. Eminem, very new team, and then like Rogue and Navi seeming to lose 2 of their better players, so maybe Outsiders also getting buffed. But right, their biggest potential competition in like BDS and Empire seemingly weakened, so that was perhaps one of the biggest bonuses, but obviously only dropping 1 game, and it being seemingly just a fluke loss because they lost to, you know, one of the lower teams in Navi. So yeah, I mean, maybe they'll win the major, maybe they'll do well at the major, or maybe they'll be exposed at the major for not being quite so good, but in fact benefiting from the best of 1 format or a weak EUL or whatever. But so we'll have to see how well they do in the context of the global scene and in the context of best of 3s and whatnot. So maybe they won't even make it to best of 3s because, of course, half the teams won't. They'll go out in groups and not get to play any best of 3s, which is rough. But it's almost like it's not like a best of 3, right? But double round robin at least is a little bit better than single round robin, but it is only against 3 other teams. So, you know, the format discussion is maybe for another day. I suppose that does it for this video. So, right, if you enjoy this type of content, leave me a subscription. If you enjoyed this video in particular, leave me a like. If you have any comments, maybe particularly about how you felt about this video or what other things you want to see in the future, leave me a comment regarding those things. And with all of that being said, I will catch you guys in the next video.